Have you ever wondered what secrets hide within the misty shores of forgotten villages? Welcome to the Black Ferry, a chilling horror story about a ghost ship that demands a terrible price. If you're ready for more haunted tales like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. They sent me to the village of Dunhara because no one else wanted to go. It was the kind of assignment you took when you had nothing left to lose, or when you still thought you could salvage a career already adrift. I told myself it was just another story. A forgotten coastal town, dying traditions, a puff piece to fill space between more important news. Nothing more, nothing personal. I arrived under a bruised sky, the Atlantic rolling in slow and heavy against the cliffs. The village clung to the shoreline like a crust of salt, weather-beaten and slowly dissolving under the constant weight of wind and mist. It was smaller than I expected. 24 houses at most, a shuttered pub, a chapel with a crooked steeple, and a harbor that looked long abandoned. As I stepped out of the rental car, the fog closed in behind me, swallowing the narrow, rutted road that had delivered me. Here, the air smelled of whetstone and rotting kelp. No welcome committee. No curious onlookers. Only the sense that I was already being watched. I checked into the only inn, a sagging building with a sign so faded I could barely read it. The Gray Mare, it said. Inside, the woman at the desk, Mrs. Keene, barely looked at me. She slid a heavy brass key across the counter without a word. Rough weather ahead, she muttered as I turned away. Best stay indoors after dark. Her tone wasn't suggestive. It was final. Though the dark was not simply absence of light, but something far worse. The first day, I wandered the village with my camera and notebook. Most houses were boarded up. The few that were inhabited had curtains drawn tight, doors bolted even under daylight. I tried to speak to a few villagers. Fishermen fixing nets that looked too ragged to ever see water again. An old woman tending a herb garden that seemed more weeds than medicine, but they would only shake their heads at my questions, lips pressed thin. The only person who spoke freely was a man called Amon. He was ancient, the sort of ancient that shrinks a person into a bundle of sticks and leather. He sat on the crumbling seawall, feeding crumbs to gulls that seemed less interested in the bread than in the man himself. You're here for the ferry, aren't you? He rasped without looking at me. I paused. The ferry. He nodded, slow and deliberate. It comes once a year. No captain, no sail, no light. Just the tide and the black mist. I smiled politely, already drafting the article's tone in my mind. Local folklore, quaint superstitions, the kind of thing readers found charming over their morning coffee. You ever seen it yourself? I asked, pen poised. Eamon turned his head then, and for the first time, I saw his eyes. One was milky blind, the other sharp and gold as a hawk's. I seen it. I lost my brother to it. He spoke with no emotion. Thought he could trick it. Thought he could board in return. What happened? I asked, humoring him. He tossed a final crumb to the gulls. They found his boots on the dock the next morning. Boots, and something else wearing his face. That night, the storm began. It started with a low moaning wind that rattled the window panes like fingernails tapping. The inn shuddered in the gusts, and even inside my small room, the air felt damp and metallic. I tried to distract myself, transcribing notes, sorting through photos on my laptop. Nothing unusual, just empty docks, blind windows, tangled fishing nets like spider webs. Yet somewhere deep in the night, I woke to the sound of bells, soft, distant, hollow. Not the bright peal of a church bell, but the mournful clang of something rusted, swinging over open water. I pressed my face to the cold glass. Out beyond the harbor, where the mist swallowed the horizon, I saw it. A shape, low in the water. Black against black. It moved without sound, without sail, without even the ripple of an oar. And somehow, despite the distance, despite the fog, I felt it, looking at me. The next morning, the village was empty, doors locked, curtains drawn. Even the animals seemed to have fled. Only the sea remained, lapping hungrily at the rocks. I found myself walking toward the docks, notebook forgotten, camera swinging uselessly at my side. The ferry was still there. In mooring ropes. No gangplank. It simply hovered at the edge of the harbor, black and glistening, tethered by something unseen. The wood looked ancient, soaked in tar and salt. Parts of it seemed fused with other materials, twisted metal, bone-white ribs of something far too large to be any shipwreck. The closer I got, the more the world seemed to narrow, the colors bleeding into gray and black. Even the sound of the wind faded until only the slow, deep creak of the ferry remained. I should have turned back. Every instinct screamed at me to do so. But another part of me, the part that had dragged me through wars, disasters, and political scandals without blinking, whispered, "No one's written this story yet. This is yours." I stepped onto the dock. The boards groaned under my weight, slick with mist and age. The ferry loomed before me now, a yawning maw. And then, a figure moved aboard. It was a shape wrapped in tattered cloth, featureless, its face hidden. It raised one arm, as if inviting me forward. I don't remember making the decision. I don't remember lifting my foot. All I know is that I found myself standing on the deck of the black ferry, the mist swallowing the village behind me. And then the ferry moved, gliding away from shore, away from all reason and light. The sea stretched flat as glass, the sky low and endless, and no stars. No moon, no horizon, just me, the ferry, and the mist. And somewhere below the surface of that unnaturally still water, something was following us. The ferry cut through the mist like a blade through cloth, yet there was no wind, no engines, only that soft, relentless creak of ancient wood shifting with some inner breath. I moved carefully along the deck, half expecting it to collapse under me. The boards were slick beneath my boots, and the mist clung to the ferry like a second skin, thick enough that I could barely see beyond a few feet. The figure I had glimpsed, the one who had beckoned, was gone now. If it had ever been there at all. Minutes or hours passed. Time meant nothing here. I tried to pull out my phone, instinct driving me, but the screen was dead. Even the faint glow of its emergency light refused to spark. There was no sound but the groan of wood and the slow lap of unseen waters below. Yet somehow, in the vibrating air, I felt whispers, too faint to catch words, too heavy to ignore. A coldness seeped up from the soles of my feet. It wasn't the chill of the sea. I knew that instinctively. It was something deeper, something ancient and wrong. I found what passed for a cabin near the stern. Its door was a patchwork of planks, lashed together with rusted chains and something that looked disturbingly like tendons stretched dry and brittle. The handle turned easily under my hand. Inside, the cabin was impossibly larger than the boat should allow. A wide, low-ceilinged space lined with row upon row of objects. Old photographs, rusted cutlery, child's toys, weathered books whose titles had been erased by time. Each item was laid out with deliberate care, as if part of some vast ledger or museum catalog, and between them, in spaces where dust should have gathered, were faint smears of dark, sticky residue. At the center of the room, something hung from the beams overhead. At first, I thought it was a lantern, but as I drew closer, I realized it was a cage, a small, intricate cage made of bone and copper wire. inside of which something flickered weakly. A light, no, a memory. I don't know how I knew, but somehow I understood. It was a memory trapped and bleeding inside that tiny prison. Someone's laughter once. A summer afternoon. The scent of lavender and salt. It pulsed once, weakly, like the heartbeat of a dying bird, and then it guttered out, leaving only cold. I stumbled backward. My hand brushed another object, a child's shoe, small and cracked with age, and an image slammed into my mind with brutal clarity. A girl, perhaps 6 or 7, running barefoot along a rocky shore, the ferry looming behind her, its silhouette swallowing the sun. She tripped. She fell. Hands, too many hands, reached from the mist and pulled her away, her scream cut off as neatly as a thread snipped by shears. I fled the cabin, crashing back onto the deck. The mist had thickened, coiling around my legs, pulling at me with the slow, patient grip of something that had all the time in the world. Above, the sky was a dead, uniform gray. Below, the water was gone. Or perhaps it had never been water at all. Now it was a surface, a skin stretched tight, and beneath it, I saw shapes shifting, long, sinuous things that moved without breaking the surface, their forms glimpsed only in the trembling reflections of the ferry's hull. They circled lazily, as if savoring the scent of something inevitable. A sound rose from below decks, the deep, wet thudding, like a heart beating too slowly. And with it came a voice, not spoken aloud, but vibrating directly against the bones of my skull. "Welcome back." I turned, searching for the source, but the mist was too thick. Everywhere and nowhere, the ferry lurched slightly, and I stumbled against the railing. It was then I saw, or thought I saw, figures standing at the edges of the deck, tall, thin silhouettes, their faces blurred and shifting, their clothes hung in tatters, indistinguishable from the mist. One figure stepped forward. A woman, her features barely visible, but enough that a jagged bolt of recognition speared through me. She looked like someone I had once loved, someone I had failed. I opened my mouth to speak, to call out, but the words turned to ice on my tongue. Her eyes were empty sockets, weeping black. I backed away, heart hammering, and stumbled into another shape. This one was smaller, stooped, an old man. His face was familiar too familiar. It was Eamon. Except his mouth was sewn shut with strands of seaweed, and where his hand brushed mine, the skin sloughed away, revealing only dripping bone. I wrenched free with a gasp. "This isn't real," I told myself. "It's the mist. It's the cold. It's my mind breaking under pressure." But the ferry beneath my feet hummed with something deeper than madness, a hunger, a need that had nothing to do with hallucination. "You came freely," the voice in my skull said again. "And freely given is freely taken." The ferry shuddered violently. Around me, the figures began to close in, their movements jerky, marionette-like. I turned toward the prow, desperate for escape, and there, standing atop the bow, was the true captain, not a man, not a creature that had ever been human. It was the ferry itself. A mass of wood and rope and flesh, twisted into a vaguely humanoid shape. Its eyes were twin holes punched through reality, leaking mist and darkness. Its chest open like a rotten gate, revealing a cavity filled with still beating hearts, not symbolic, not metaphorical, real, pulsing, stolen hearts, each trapped in a tangle of bone and sinew. And I knew, without being told, that one of them was already mine. Panic gave me a moment's clarity. I sprinted toward the railing, intending to jump, to dive into the still surface below, anything to escape. But as I reached the edge, I saw my reflection, or what should have been my reflection. Instead, a hollow version of myself stared back, skin gray and cracked like old driftwood, eyes black and leaking mist, mouth stitched shut. It smiled, a slow, splitting grin. And with that smile, something inside me unraveled. I turned, looking back at the ferry. The figures had vanished. The captain, the ferry, waited with infinite patience. Somewhere deep inside, a voice, not mine, whispered, "Come home." And I stepped away from the edge. The ferry moved without sound or motion, and I, no longer sure whether I moved of my own will, I found myself drifting back toward the cabin door, the relic room, the place where memories came to die. Inside, nothing had changed, or so I thought, until I noticed that among the rusted artifacts and broken toys, a new object had appeared on one of the low, rotting shelves. A battered leather satchel, its clasp still faintly stamped with the initials ST. My own. Trembling, I reached out and brushed it with my fingertips. A sharp crack sounded. Pain lanced through my skull as a fresh memory bloomed violently in my mind. A train platform, the scent of oil and iron. A woman turning away from me. Boarding a train I had sworn I'd follow her onto, but never did. Her face was blurred now, unreachable. The regret bloomed, real and jagged as broken glass. The satchel burst open. From it tumbled loose papers, old photographs, a cracked fountain pen, all the little detritus of a life defined more by what it had failed to hold onto than what it had built. Each item that spilled out seemed to make the ferry stronger. I could feel it in the groan of its bones beneath my feet, the tightening weave of mist around my throat. I understood now. The ferry didn't just carry the dead. It carried the forsaken, the abandoned. It fed on memory, on guilt, on the rot of the soul that even death could not cleanse. I stumbled back out onto the deck, gasping. The mist peeled away from my mouth just enough to let me breathe. A cruel mercy. The shapes were returning now, stepping through the fog with awful deliberateness. Each wore a face I half remembered. Each was something, someone. I had failed. I backed away, my spine pressed to the railing. There was nowhere left to go. "Accept your passage," the voice intoned, resonating from the ferry itself. "You have earned it." And yet, something in me, something stubborn and jagged and still alive, refused. I did not belong to them. Not yet. Not unless I chose to. With a surge of desperate strength, I forced myself upright. I stared into the hollow face of the ferry's captain, the twisted mass of flesh and wood and despair, and I spoke, not in words. Words were meaningless here, but in a thought. A howl of defiance. The ferry shuddered. The deck beneath my feet rippled as though I stood on the back of some vast, enraged creature. The mist screamed, high and shrill, tearing at my ears, my skin, my mind. Shapes lunged at me, clawing, wailing. Memories twisted into weapons. I felt hands grasping at me, the hands of those I had abandoned, those I had hurt. But I pushed through them. I focused on the prow, on the edge where, once, I had seen the water. The surface stretched taut again, a thin membrane over the abyss. I ran. The ferry fought back. The deck heaved. The mist thickened. The captain thing screamed. And the noise wasn't sound. It was feeling, raw and nauseating, like guilt driven into the marrow of my bones. But I didn't stop. I hurled myself forward, through the mist, through the screaming, through my own fear, and off the ferry. The surface shattered like glass as I plunged through it. Freezing cold enveloped me. I sank into darkness, so complete it swallowed thought. Something brushed against me, long, slick, and hungry, but I kicked, clawed, foot upward with everything I had left. Hands grasped at my ankles, Voices whispered in my ears. Stay, sink, become. But I refused. I broke the surface with a gasp that tore my throat raw. Above me, the mist was burning away, torn apart by a wind that howled from nowhere. And there, dimly, I saw the shore, real, solid. Earth. I swam toward it, every stroke in agony. The ferry loomed behind me, silent and watching, its black silhouette beginning to drift backward into the mist. When my fingers finally scraped rocky sand, I crawled up the beach like a drowning man, which, in truth, I was. I collapsed on the shore, coughing up salt water and blood. Above me, the sky was clear, gray, yes, but free of the choking mist. The ferry had gone. Or so I thought, because as I lay there, gasping, I saw, far out beyond the last shreds of mist, a dark shape still watching the ferry. Was not a dream, not an illusion. It had marked me, and the mark would not fade. Eventually, villagers found me. An old fisherman named Sean and a boy too young to be afraid. They brought me back to the village, wrapped me in blankets, fed me strong tea laced with something harsher. They did not ask questions. They did not have to. The knowledge was in their eyes, ancient, resigned. They had seen others like me before. They knew. That night, as I lay in a borrowed bed staring at the cracked ceiling, I felt something stir inside my chest. A slow, rhythmic thud-thud, out of sync with my own heartbeat. The memory of the ferry's captain, of its chest cavity lined with stolen hearts, rose unbidden, and I understood. Part of me was still aboard, always would be. I am not the same man who boarded that ferry. Something came back with me, something unseen, something that sometimes moves behind my reflection in the mirror, and sometimes, in the dead hours before dawn, when the mist rolls in too thick and the sea falls silent. I hear a horn blowing across the water, low, mournful, and very close. I haven't answered it yet, but someday I will. We all do. Weeks passed. The village returned to its rhythm, a slow, weary beat older than memory. Fishing boats came and went. Children played in the gray surf. The mist crept in at night and was gone by morning, like a visitor too polite to overstay. Outwardly, nothing had changed, but I had. I tried to leave, packed my things, booked a train, even reached the station once, standing under a schedule board smeared with rain. But as the train approached, as its headlights speared the mist and the brakes screamed against iron, I felt a pressure on my chest, a weight, an invisible hand, gently but firmly pushing me back. I turned and fled the station like a madman. The villagers said nothing, not when I sold my camera for next to nothing, not when I stopped answering calls from the mainland. They simply made room, found me work fixing boats, mending nets, gave me a place by the fire when the nights grew too long. They understood. I wasn't the first. One evening, months later, as autumn gnawed the edges of the fields, Sean the fisherman sat beside me at the pub. His hand, rough as driftwood, clapped my shoulder once, a gesture heavy with meaning. You saw it, he said simply. I nodded. He stared into his pint for a long time before speaking again. Mark stays with you, he said. Can't scrub it off. Can't drink it away. Like barnacles on an old hull. I wanted to ask, how do you live with it? But I already knew the answer. You don't. You just float. Some nights, when the mist hangs lower than it should, I walk to the cliffs overlooking the bay. From there, you can see the water stretched out like a wrinkled shroud. You can listen, if you're brave, and sometimes, if the wind cuts just right, you'll hear the soft creak of oars.no boat.no lantern. Just the sound. 2 nights ago, I heard it again, but this time, there was more. A figure stood at the edge of the surf, small, hunched. A man, maybe. Or a boy. He stared out at the water, unmoving, even as the tide pulled at his feet. And when he finally turned to look at me, I saw his face, hollow, eroded by grief, too old for someone so young. I knew, in that moment, what would happen. He would see it, and he would board. I wanted to call out, warn him, but the words froze in my throat, because deep down, I understood. It wasn't a choice. Not really. Once the ferry sees you, you're already halfway aboard. The boy stepped forward. Mist licked at his ankles, welcoming. Far offshore, a horn blew, low and mournful, echoing across the rocks like a funeral bell. The black ferry was coming. I watched, helpless, as the boy walked into the mist. First up to his knees, then his waist, then he was gone. The water barely rippled. I stood there for a long time after, staring at the empty bay, until the first fingers of dawn began to pry apart the clouds. When I finally turned to leave, something heavy shifted inside me. A memory, not mine, but one newly added. A boy, alone, stepping into the mist, clutching a worn photograph in his hand. A fresh echo on the ferry's deck. A fresh weight in my own heart. The black ferry had fed again. It always will. And someday, when my hands grow too unsteady to mend nets, when the mist becomes more familiar than the land, when the guilt outweighs the will to fight, I will walk into the water too, and the ferry will be waiting. It waits for all of us. Would you board the black ferry if it appeared before you? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget, for more spine-chilling horror stories like this, subscribe and explore the darkness with us.